Rome, in the 62nd year after Christ, within the marble heart of Nero's golden house, music and madness mingled beneath torchlight. Among a sea of slaves, one woman moved with quiet grace, Selene, daughter of a Greek captive, unseen by all until that night. When the emperor's gaze found hers, the laughter stopped. In that single glance, her life was rewritten. For in ancient Rome, the moment an emperor desired you was not a blessing, it was a death sentence wrapped in silk. The night burned gold. Flames danced across polished marble, as the Emperor of Rome reclined upon a couch of crimson velvet, surrounded by courtiers drunk on wine and power. Laughter echoed like a storm through the vaulted hall, and the air smelled of roasted peacock and myrrh. Selene stood among the serving slaves, her linen tunic damp with fear and sweat, balancing a silver tray that trembled in her hands. To her left, a flute played softly. To her right, a senator whispered filth about the girls who poured his drink. She had learned to make herself invisible, to move unseen between cruelty and command. Yet when Nero lifted his cup and looked in her direction, the world froze, his eyes wild and glittering. The eyes of a man who mistook desire for divinity caught hers and held them. He smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that spread through the room like smoke. The other slaves stiffened. They had seen this before. A glance from the emperor was a summons from which none returned unchanged. The feast continued, but Selene's heartbeat drowned the music. She tried to lower her gaze, to fade once more into silence, but Nero had already marked her. He rose from his couch, silencing the instruments with a gesture, and spoke with theatrical amusement. "Bring me the girl with the pale eyes," he said. The command rippled through the hall. Poppaea Sabina, his empress, froze mid-gesture, her painted lips tightening around a brittle smile. The guards approached, their shadows falling over Selene like a curtain drawn before a tragedy. As they led her away, she passed the golden statues of gods who never answered prayers. Beyond the feast's laughter, down corridors lined with silk and marble, the music of Rome faded into whispers. Somewhere behind her, the emperor resumed his song, his voice thick with delight, unaware or perhaps uncaring that he had just chosen his next victim. Selene's steps echoed against the stone, each one taking her deeper into the heart of a palace, where beauty and ruin shared the same bed. Dawn crept slowly across the marble floors of the imperial palace, painting the walls in a soft, deceptive gold. The feast of the previous night felt like a dream carved from smoke, yet Selene awoke to its consequence. 2 guards stood outside her quarters, waiting with the stillness of statues. They said nothing as she was ordered to follow. Her bare feet touched the cold floor, her body trembling beneath a thin tunic that once marked her as property of the household. Now, even that mark was stripped away. A silent procession of attendants led her through a corridor lined with mosaics of gods, each one watching her pass with unblinking eyes. At the end of the hall stood the matron of the inner court, a tall woman draped in purple and gold, whose beauty had long since soured into cruelty. She held a basin of oil and perfume, its scent sharp enough to burn the breath. Without a word, the attendants pulled Selene forward, their hands rough and practiced. They bathed her as though preparing a sacrifice, scrubbing until her skin reddened, perfuming her hair with myrrh, and dressing her in silk dyed the color of sunset. Around her neck, they fastened a golden collar, not of iron, but of servitude nonetheless. It bore no name, no mark of ownership, because she no longer belonged to anyone. She belonged to him. The matron's voice, low and cold, finally broke the silence. "When the emperor looks upon you," she said, "you will kneel until he speaks. You will not raise your eyes. You will not speak unless commanded. You will breathe as though you are in the presence of a god." Selene wanted to ask why obedience to a mortal required the reverence of divinity, but her throat refused to move. Instead, she nodded, as countless women had before her. The doors of the emperor's atrium opened, spilling light like a blade. Nero reclined upon a couch draped in silver fabric, his fingers idly tracing the rim of a goblet. Musicians played softly in the corner, their notes fragile, as though fearing interruption. He looked young, almost beautiful, yet the beauty was wrong, shaped by cruelty, sharpened by indulgence. When Selene was brought before him, he studied her not as a person but as an object newly acquired. "So this is the girl," he murmured, his voice sweet as honey poured over venom. "The one who dares to carry the eyes of Athena." The words made his courtiers laugh. But Selene's body felt cold. He beckoned her closer. She hesitated only a moment before stepping forward, her knees bending until her forehead brushed the marble floor. Nero leaned toward her, studying the curve of her neck, the tremor of her breath. "Raise your head," he commanded softly. When her eyes met his, the room dissolved around them. For a heartbeat, she saw not an emperor, but a man consumed by something monstrous and endless. And in that moment, Selene understood Rome's most dangerous throne was not made of gold, but of desire. Days bled into one another inside the emperor's palace, where time existed only to serve his whims. Selene's life became a performance she never auditioned for, every movement dictated by unseen eyes, every breath measured by fear. Nero's fascination grew with the persistence of disease, spreading through every corner of her world. He summoned her to the gardens at dawn to listen to his poems, demanded she stand near the fountains while he practiced his lyre, and commanded painters to capture the precise curve of her face. The palace walls filled with her likeness before she understood what was happening. Selene pouring wine in one, Selene weeping in another, Selene with eyes raised toward a sun she could no longer see. The emperor had turned her into art, and art, in Rome, belonged only to its creator. Each day, he spoke of destiny and divine favor, calling her his muse, his omen, his living prophecy. Yet beneath the poetry lay possession. When she smiled, it was because he told her to. When she laughed, it was because the silence displeased him. The guards began to call her the Shadow, for she followed wherever Nero walked, silent and shining, the reflection of his mood. At night, she was made to dine beside him while senators and generals toasted to their emperor's new inspiration. The laughter was sharp. Selene learned that in the palace, beauty was not a gift but a weapon turned inward. Poppaea Sabina, the empress, entered one evening draped in emerald silk and venomous calm. She stood behind Selene, her hand resting lightly on her shoulder, and whispered with a smile that did not touch her eyes, "A wise woman never lets the emperor see her bleed." The words sank into Selene like prophecy. That night, she could not sleep. She heard the city beyond the marble walls, chariots clattering, dogs barking, the distant hum of Rome's endless appetite. She thought of her mother, a Greek slave who once told her that beauty draws both light and fire. Now, Selene burned quietly in the reflection of Nero's gaze, trapped between divinity and ruin. The emperor sent her jewels, silks, and music, as though gilding a cage could erase its bars. When he spoke to her, his tone carried the softness of affection and the cruelty of ownership. "You have made Rome listen again," he told her one morning as he brushed her hair aside. "Even the gods envy my creation." But Selene felt no power, only the creeping chill of isolation. Her friends among the servants no longer met her eyes. Her laughter frightened them. Her name was whispered like a curse. The more Nero adored her, the more she disappeared. In the court of Rome, love was only another form of control, and devotion another word for slavery. Selene, once invisible among the countless, had become visible only to the man whose attention destroyed everything it touched. Rumors in the imperial palace spread faster than the scent of incense. What began as whispers between attendants grew into a quiet rebellion of eyes and gestures, all directed toward Selene. The emperor's infatuation had become a spectacle, and in Rome, spectacle was never safe. Poppaea Sabina, empress of perfect poise and hidden fury, and watched from behind her veil of pearls. She had endured Nero's passions before, each as brief as they were brutal, but this one was different. The girl was not a courtesan or noblewoman. She was a slave, a foreigner, a living insult to the bloodlines that fed the empire. Poppaea's jealousy was not born of love but of power. To be replaced by someone beneath her rank meant the very structure of her world was cracking. She began her vengeance in silence. Servants loyal to her scattered fragments of poison into Selene's days, a look withheld, a word twisted, a rumor that she practiced charms to hold the emperor's favor. Soon the household began to avoid her. The painters who once begged to sketch her face suddenly found other muses. Musicians went quiet when she entered the hall. Even the guards, once courteous, now looked at her with a strange pity, as though watching a doomed animal pacing its cage. Poppaea's cruelty was an art refined by patience. During a feast held in her honor, she ordered Selene to pour the emperor's wine. The hall glittered with gold and laughter, As Selene bent to refill Nero's cup, Poppeia's voice sliced through the noise. "Careful, my dear," she said, smiling with her eyes fixed on the emperor. "The hand that serves a god must tremble for the right reasons." The laughter that followed was thin and sharp, cutting deeper than any blade. Selene froze, her cheeks burning, the silver pitcher shaking in her grasp. Nero said nothing, perhaps amused, perhaps testing her reaction. She lowered her head and completed the task, though her heart thundered like a captive drum. That night, she sat alone in her chamber, tracing the faint bruises left by gold bracelets too tight around her wrists. The silence pressed against her like stone. She realized that the empress did not need to strike her. Rome itself would do the work. Each rumor, each glance, each small cruelty would grind her down until she either submitted or vanished. But Selene had inherited her mother's defiance. Beneath the fear, something within her hardened a quiet flame born not of rage but of survival. She would not cry before those who fed on weakness. The next morning, when summoned again to attend the emperor, she stood taller, her gaze calm and unreadable. Poppaea watched from her couch, her smile fixed and cold. In that brief exchange, two women of vastly different worlds understood one another perfectly. In Nero's palace, love and jealousy were weapons drawn from the same sheath, and Selene had just learned how to hold hers without bleeding. Morning light filtered through the high windows of the empress's chambers, soft and deceptive, as if even the sun feared to witness what would unfold. Selene was summoned before dawn by two attendants who refused to meet her eyes. They led her through the long corridors to Poppeia's private baths, where the scent of jasmine mingled with the faint sting of vinegar used to purify the marble floors. The empress reclined in the water like a serpent in silk, her jewels glinting beneath the steam. Around her, noblewomen and courtiers lingered, their laughter a thin veil over cruelty. "Our emperor speaks of you often," Poppaea said, her tone wrapped in sweetness that chilled the air. "He says your voice can charm the gods. Let us see if it can charm Rome." Selene's stomach twisted, but she bowed in obedience. Musicians were summoned, lyres tuned to the edge of silence. The empress leaned forward, her expression one of idle curiosity. "Sing, slave," she commanded softly. "Sing of loyalty." The word lingered in the air like a blade. Selene's throat felt tight, her palms damp. She remembered her mother's old songs, melodies from the Greek Isles, soft as the tide, but she knew those would not please the room. So she began to sing of Rome instead, of marble and flame, of power and sacrifice. Her voice trembled at first, then grew steady, filling the chamber with a haunting beauty that made even the courtiers fall silent. The music rose like prayer and grief entwined, echoing against the stone walls. For a moment, there was no empire, no emperor, no chains, only sound. When it ended, Poppeia's applause was slow and measured. "How touching," she murmured, her smile razor-thin. "Such devotion from one who was not born Roman. Tell me, does your loyalty belong to Rome or to the man who owns it?" The question hung heavy. Laughter rippled through the room. Selene's breath caught, her heart hammering so loudly she feared the empress could hear it. She opened her mouth but found no words that could save her. Silence was her only defense. Poppaea leaned back, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "Wise choice," she said, the smile never fading. "A silent slave is a living one." The bathers laughed again, their amusement echoing down the corridors long after Selene was dismissed. Outside, she felt the heat of shame and fear crawl beneath her skin. Every step away from that room felt like walking through invisible fire. Yet within that humiliation, something began to shift. She realized the empress sought not only to destroy her dignity, but to remind her of what she truly was, an ornament, disposable and voiceless. But the song had done something Poppaea did not intend. The echoes of it lingered in the palace halls, carried by servants and guards, whispered even in Nero's presence. And for the first time, Selene sensed that her voice, though dangerous, could be her only weapon. The following evening, Nero summoned Selene to his private chamber. The moon hung low over Rome, casting silver light across the mosaics that glittered like captured stars. She entered barefoot, her silk robe whispering against the marble floor. The emperor sat by the fire, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. Around him lay scrolls of poetry and broken instruments, remnants of his restless genius. When he turned to her, his expression was unreadable. They say your song moved even the empress to tears, he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of both flattery and accusation. Selene lowered her gaze, unsure if silence would protect her or condemn her. Nero rose and walked closer, the air shifting with each step. Tell me, he murmured, when you sang of loyalty, was it to me or to Rome? She wanted to say neither, that her song belonged only to the gods who still remembered mercy. But words were dangerous in this place. So she answered the only way she could. To the empire, my lord. Nero studied her, then smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. Then Rome rewards its faithful. He clapped once, and a servant appeared carrying a small scroll bound in red wax. You are free, he said. The words struck her harder than chains. Freedom, in the emperor's mouth, was a jest. The scroll declared her no longer a slave of the household but the emperor's companion. You may wear jewels now, dine with my poets, speak among senators, Nero continued, his tone dripping with mock benevolence. But understand this, your freedom ends where my sight does. He placed the scroll in her trembling hands. You belong to no master now, except my will. The chamber fell silent except for the fire's soft crackle. Selene bowed, her heart beating like a trapped bird. She wanted to scream, to flee, but the words of her mother echoed within her. Survival is not submission, it is endurance. When she left the room, the corridors seemed narrower, the air heavier. Slaves she once served now bowed to her, but their eyes were filled with pity, not envy. In Rome, power was never given, it was loaned, and always with a cost. That night, as she stood on the balcony overlooking the city, the wind carried the distant hum of laughter, of music, of life continuing beyond her reach. She touched the golden collar around her neck, now replaced with a chain of pearls, and understood that nothing had truly changed. The cage had only become beautiful, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the faint voice of her own song echo through the night, a haunting reminder that even in the heart of Rome's splendor, freedom was the cruelest illusion of all. If you want to see how this illusion unravels, and what price she must pay for the emperor's love, subscribe for the next chapter.